It is now 2:01. If anyone joins us later, they can. Otherwise, for those who are interested, I'm going to start the lecture part of this course right now. And what I'm going to do today is I want to talk a little bit about psychopathy. I want to talk a little bit about personality disorders and the personality of the psychopath and the um, and the criminal. Want to get into a little bit of Samanow's book, the Inside the Criminal Mind. I think it's a very good book, very interesting book. I was talking with Dr. Stallings about it just yesterday, and to be totally blunt and honest, not everybody in the field agrees with Dr. Samanow. He presents some very interesting and very controversial pictures about criminals and about the criminal personality. For one thing, Dr. Samanow doesn't necessarily agree with the typical nature, nurture paradigm. In fact, Dr. Samanow says that the biosocial model of criminality is incredibly lacking. That what the biosocial model of criminality fails to take into account is the fact that criminals make choices, and that we need to add into our model a third factor. It's no longer just what you're born with or what you experience as an individual that determines who you are, that determines your personality. It is also very much the choices that you make um, that determine your personality as well. Now, this is a controversial concept, the whole issue of choices, the whole issue that that free will, if you will, exists. Dr. Dill and I get into discussions quite frequently about the whole issue of free will, of free choice. Dr. Dill is of the opinion that free will is an illusion. We think we have free will. We think we make choices when in reality we don't. And if you look at a scientific study of psychology, choice really doesn't have much of a place in it. But Samanow is in his book and in his work is focusing on the choices that people make that lead them to become criminals. So you're born with a particular biology, you're born with a particular brain, you're born with a particular body, a particular way of doing things, looking at things, understanding things. You then are in a particular social group, a particular ethnic or cultural group. You're born in a particular nation or a particular part of a country. And those things are very strong influences, but how you choose to respond to them in large part determines who you are as a person. So having said that, and having gone into that, I do want to, um, as I said, I do want to talk a little bit about Samanow's book. And let me bring up my note here for just a minute. Going here. Um, okay. One of the things close that, hang on, pulled up the wrong one. Um, well, I'm not going to look for it right now. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, and we'll talk about Samanow's work from a different perspective. One of the things that Samanow talks about in terms of his book is when we take a look at risk factors, and there's a reading that I had you read in terms of risk and protective factors. One of the things that Samanau points out in his book, and this is absolutely true, is if you take a look at the population of criminals, if this box, if this grid here represents the entire population of of individuals who are criminals, and you look at how many of them have a significant number of risk factors, you see that yes, indeed, many, if not most, criminals meet a majority of those risk factors. But there are a group of criminals who have absolutely none of those risk factors. You can always find in any prison a large number of individuals who don't meet the profile of the typical prisoner. Similarly, when you take a look at individuals who have a large number of those risk factors. So if this is the criminal population, we find a number of individuals who have none of the risk factors that are commonly associated with why people become criminals. They have none of the biological or none of the social factors that cause individuals to become criminals. Similarly, if you take a look at the general population, or if you take a look at the population of individuals who have all of the risk factors, so these are the people who have multiple risk factors, you find that a similar thing occurs, that there are a large number of people with these risk factors that are not criminal. And so our models of criminality, our models of criminal behavior are lacking precisely because they don't take into account that third factor, that psychological factor in terms of the choices of an individual. So let me shift my sharing here. I'm going to do a new share, and I'm going to review the psychopathy checklist for you, because psychopathy is a very big issue in looking at criminal behavior. And in fact, next week's discussion is going to focus on, is Mitnick a psychopath? And I'm going to leave that up to you to decide, because I'm not certain that he is. I'm not certain that he isn't, but we'll take a look at it. Now, Robert Hare developed. Hang on a second here. It's not doing what I want. Robert Hare developed the psychopathy checklist in the 1980s. And this has become the gold standard for psychopathy. If you want to know whether somebody is or is not a psychopath, this is the way that you determine it. Now, the psychopathic checklist is scored, each of these criteria are scored on a scale of 0, 1, or 2. 0 is not present. In other words, that particular factor, the individual doesn't exhibit that factor. It's just not there. It's just not present in the individual's behavior. Let me back up a second here, and I need to discuss something else. Let me go back to my whiteboard for a minute. When we're looking at evaluating criminals, and this is something for all of you, not just this week, but in all weeks when we're doing our case studies, there are 4 sources of information that are absolutely critical. If you're not looking at all 4 of these sources of information, you are doing an inadequate job. The first source of information is the individual's life experiences. In other words, we need to look at what the person has done. What have they done with their life? Okay? And so life experiences, this is where we go and we look at the number of past crimes the individual has committed. We look at the severity of the crimes. One of the things we want to look at is we want to look at the progression of activity. If we look in terms of violence, just looking at violence. Has there been a steady progression in violence, that it starts off with little or no violence, then there's more violence and more? So we want to look at the progression of criminal offenses. A criminal that is like this, with the progression of violence, is a very different criminal than one that is like this in terms of the progression of violence, or one that goes like this in terms of the progression of violence. Those are three very different criminal types. Criminal type 1 is the individual who becomes more severe over time. Their criminal offenses, each criminal offense becomes a little bit more violent, a little bit more intense, a little bit more antisocial than the previous one. This criminal number 2, they plateau out. They plateau out after a while. They go to a certain point and then they kind of plateau. That's a very different type of criminal than criminal 3, which is a criminal whose level of violence remains constant throughout their criminal career. So we're looking at different types of criminals here. Criminal type 1 typically tends to be your psychopath. The psychopath is continually wanting to up the ante. They get bored. They end up needing more intensity in order to get the same excitement that they were having before. So we want to take a look at, the first thing we want to look at is life, what Funder calls life experiences, or L data. Want to look at life experiences, or L data. We want to look at ratings. What I mean by ratings is, what do other people say about the individual? People who know him or her, people who have been with him or her. What do those who know the person well say about the individual? And this becomes incredibly important because this presents a counterbalance to what we're getting from the criminal, what we're getting from other sources. We want to look at what the criminal says about him or herself. How does the criminal explain his or her behavior? How does the criminal explain his or her activity? What do they see? And one of the questions that came up in the reading quiz this last week was the rationality of a criminal, rationalization, and how a criminal uses rationalization as a way of justifying their behavior. And so we want to look at what the criminal says about him or herself. And then we want to look at the criminal's behavior. We want to look at what is the criminal doing? What are they doing now? What are they doing in front of us? We want to look at interviews with the individual. How do they react? What is their demeanor? What is their ability? So if you're looking at Kevin Mitnick, for example, you really need to pay attention to interviews with him and watch him. Watch how smooth or unsmooth he is, or rough he is. Watch how much he is able to be glib and talk about things fluently versus having difficulty in speaking and expressing himself. So these 4 sources of information become extremely important in something like the in something like the Hare psychopathy checklist. Now, going back to the PCL, or the psychopathy checklist, as it's often called, the PCL for psychopathy checklist. So 0, as I mentioned, is that the characteristic we're looking at, 0, the characteristic we're looking at is not present. The characteristic is not present in the criminal's life experiences. The characteristic is not present in what other people say about the criminal. The characteristic is not present in what the criminal says about himself, his own way of relating to things. The characteristic is not present in our observation of the of the criminal, what we actually see in the criminal. So those of you who are evaluating, whether it be Mitnick or whether it be Wesley Allen Dodd or whether it be Reschke, regardless, you're going to want to get some YouTube videos and watch these individuals. And I did select people for whom there is information on YouTube. There is information out there, interviews with these individuals out there, so you can actually take a look and see for yourself. No forensic psychologist would ever come to an opinion about a particular individual without all four of those sources of information. So 0 means not present. 1 means that it is minimally or partially present. In other words, there are some indications about it, but it's not fully there. There are some suggestions that it is present, but it's not fully there. And then 2 means that it is fully there, fully present in the individual's behavior. So, looking at the characteristics, there are on the Hare psychopathy checklist, there are 20 criteria. 20 criteria. So an individual can have a score on the psychopathy checklist of between 0 and 40. 0, the individual gets none of the items. They're all zeros. They're all not present. Now, even in normally healthy individuals, even in typical college students, your professor here, very few of us are going to have a score of 0 on the psychopathy checklist because we all have some antisocial characteristics. And I joke about it, but those of you who don't drive the speed limit on the interstate, who go over the speed limit when you're driving on US 70 to get to the mall, those of you who don't drive the speed limit you're breaking the law. You are a bunch of antisocial individuals doing that. My point being that psychopathy is on a continuum, and we typically state that individuals who have a score of greater than 20 are showing significant psychopathic traits, and those with a score greater than 30 are very definitely psychopathic. There are other cutoffs out there as well. If you happen to read another article that gives a different cutoff, that's fine. You just, when you in your description, you need to be clear which cutoff you're using, but clearly, unless somebody gets a score at least 20, we're not talking about a psychopath. We're just talking about a normal person who occasionally does things that they shouldn't do. It also depends, the severity of the psychopathy isn't dependent purely on the total score. Don't think that the higher the score, necessarily the more severe the psychopath, although clearly if somebody gets a score of 40, they're a severe psychopath. We also need to look at which items are they getting 2s on and which items are they getting 0s or 1s on to make a distinction about the true severity of the psychopathy. So let's go over the psychopathy checklist here and talk about the characteristics of a psychopath. And I mentioned it in one of the classes. I can't remember whether it was the Monday or the Friday class, but the term sociopath, and if you use the term sociopath, what that indicates to the entire world is you don't have a clue what you're talking about. Okay, you're not an expert. Experts in the field do not use the term sociopath. The term sociopath has no meaning in the field of forensic psychology. The term psychopath does have meaning, and it refers specifically to individuals who have these characteristics here. So let's take a look at characteristics of a psychopath. The first characteristic of a psychopath I'm going to talk about is superficial charm. Superficial charm. Superficial charm refers to individuals who, when you meet them, you immediately like them, but the liking is only on the surface. When you get down deep, you realize that they really are very shallow people. The charm is all surface level. There is nothing genuine about their interest in you or their interest in anything but themselves. The second, and so psychopaths can charm the pants off of you. They really can. Psychopaths are able to con people precisely because they know how to be charming. One of the best things I ever heard, one of the best quotes I ever heard was at a conference in which Anna Salter, and Anna Salter is now retired, unfortunately, but she was one in the 1980s and 1990s. She was one of the major researchers, sex offender treatment, sex offender evaluation, sex offender studies, and so on. Very, very famous sex offender researcher in the field. You'll read all sorts of things about her if you get into working with sexual offenders. Anyways, I went to a conference where she was at one time, where she was presenting one time, and she said something that I will never forget. And I'm going to say it to you, and I want you to write it down and remember it. What she said was, niceness is a choice. It is not a personality characteristic. Niceness is a choice. It is a decision that individuals make about how to interact with others. Psychopaths are nice people because they choose to be nice when you've got something they want and they want to con you out of it. Psychopaths can be extremely charming, extremely pleasant. They can be very, very warm on the surface and so on. But as I said, as you get to know them, you realize that that niceness really doesn't go very deep. And as soon as you no longer have something they want, they're no longer nice. They're no longer pleasant. They no longer want anything to do with you. That is the characteristic of a true psychopath. So this superficial charm, this niceness that they engage in, that they um, that they have. The second is this grandiose sense of self-worth. A psychopath has a great deal of regard for themselves. They don't trust anybody else, but they absolutely, totally, and completely trust themselves. They are the most wonderful. They're the best. They are. Nobody can do it but them. They are the only one who knows. They are the only one who has. They're the only. They have this inflated sense of who they are. We're going to talk here. If I have time today, I want to talk about narcissism. I want to talk about narcissism, but psychopaths are at core narcissistic, focused on themselves. They really don't have any regard for others whatsoever. So that grandiose sense of self-worth, beyond what they are really able to do. The second characteristic of psychopaths is a need for stimulation. For a psychopath, boredom is death. The worst thing in the world that you can have, that you can be, is bored. Although I remember Jean-Paul Sartre's quote. Now, I'll share this quote with you, and then I'll get back to the need for stimulation. Jean-Paul Sartre's quote is, if you are lonely when you are by yourself, you are in bad company. Love that quote. Anyways, the psychopath needs constant stimulation. They're always looking for something to get into, something to get mixed up with. They can't handle my life for a psychopath, at least my daily life, would be absolutely intolerable. Why? Because I am probably as boringly normal as I can think. Have no drama, don't create chaos. I'm not going out starting fights. I'm not playing practical jokes on individuals. Psychopaths, while people who play practical jokes are not necessarily psychopathic, psychopaths love to play practical jokes. Psychopaths love to get other people to fight. They don't necessarily want to fight themselves because, after all, they don't want to get hurt. But they're really good at getting other people to fight and then sitting back and watching them fight and watching them go at it to each other with one another. This need for stimulation, this need for they have to constantly up the ante. It's that curve I showed you in terms of violence. A little bit is okay, and then they need more, and then they need more, and then they need more. They need the stimulation, not just physically, they also need it sexually, and so they will constantly pressure their partner into doing a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and going more on the edge and more on the edge and more on the edge. And because a little bit is not is never enough. There is no enough. There is no enough. The fourth characteristic is pathological lying. Now, let me explain what pathological lying is, because it is not simply lying. It's not simply telling an untruth. There are three things that a statement must have, or three characteristics that must be present in order for an untrue statement to be a lie. Not all untrue statements are lies. The first thing that the statement has to have is, again, the statement has to be not true. Okay? So I tell you something that is not true. Have I lied to you? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because it needs the second thing. I know that it is not true. So if I tell you something that is not true, but I believe it, sincerely believe it to be true, I haven't told you a lie. I may be spreading fake news. I may be telling you something that is totally bogus, but I believe it's to be true. Therefore, it is not a lie. I am not lying to you. I am telling you something that I believe to be true. Now, this is one of the reasons why lie detector tests and polygraph tests are absolutely horrible at detecting lies with some people, or I should say untruths in some individuals. Because if somebody believes it to be true, the polygraph test isn't going to pick it up. The third thing that it needs to have is, I tell you something that's not true. I know it is not true, and I tell it for the purpose of deception. In other words, the reason I'm telling it to you is I want to deceive you. And I have a motive. I have a motive for doing it that involves getting you to believe it so I can get something from you, so I can take something from you. That is a lie. That is a lie. So if I tell you something that's not true, I know that it's not true, but I'm telling it to you for fun. It's a joke, it's a story. Stephen King novels, for example, or you watch something on television that is pure fantasy. Did the person lie to you? The answer is no, they didn't lie to you. That is entertainment. They're doing it for you're watching it knowing that they're telling you something that's not true. Star Wars, is Star Wars a lie? No, it is entertainment. But the person who is lying, the underlying intent, the underlying motivation for telling it to you is to deceive, is to be deceptive. Now, here we go with the pathological. So now we know what lying is. Lying is saying something you know to be untrue with the purpose of deceiving, for the purpose of deception. Pathological lying is lying even when it would be better to tell the truth. Psychopaths lie simply to lie. They lie simply because they want to see if they can put one over on you. The psychopath has a horrible time telling the truth about anything, about anything, because for them it is all about the con. It is all about the manipulation. It's all about getting people to believe their deception, to believe their deception. So the second thing, the fourth thing here is pathological lying as a characteristic of the psychopath. Get down here to, and you're going to start noticing some overlap in a little bit of overlap in these things, which is inevitable when you're dealing with something as complex as psychopathy. The pathological lying. Let's talk about pathological lying for just a second here. Another one here. The pathological lying, not path, the conning and manipulative. Let's talk about that. I'm sorry, I'm losing my place here. Conning and manipulative. Psychopaths are always about trying to get something out of you, trying to con you out of something, trying to manipulate you. I'm a psychologist and I like to get to know people. I want to get to know you to get to know you. I want to get to know you so I can help you. I want to get to know you because I'm interested in other people. A psychopath wants to get to know you so they can manipulate you, so they can get something out of you, so that they can have control over you in some way. That's what makes psychopathy different from other types of fields or other types of professions where we are trying to help people, we're trying to change them, the psychopath is doing it for their own enjoyment, for their own entertainment. For psychopaths, the manipulative and conning thing is more for entertainment. It's also for personal gain. They want to make money, they want to get your money, trying to separate you from what you have. Uh, but they're conning, they're manipulative, they are, you can't trust anything they do. The sixth thing is that lack of remorse or guilt. Now, I want to talk something about remorse here for a second, and I want to talk about the difference between true remorse and false remorse. When I do something to hurt you, and I feel bad because I've hurt you, that is true remorse. My remorse is because I've done something wrong and I know that it hurts other people. True remorse, I've done something wrong and I know that it has taken something from others. That is true remorse. It is a bad feeling we have, guilt, a sense of guilt we have because of the harm caused to another. Psychopaths have a false sense of remorse. They are remorseful not because they have hurt you, but because they're in trouble. They're remorseful not because they have taken something from you, but because they got caught. Their remorse is that false remorse. It is the I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry you think I hurt you. That type of backhanded apology is typical of a psychopath. I'm sorry if you think that I did something wrong. Okay? I don't think you did something wrong. I know you did something wrong and it's not okay. But that is that lack of remorse, that false remorse. Shallow affect. Shallow affect. Affect in this sense here means emotions. They really don't, when they cry alligator tears. There's something phony about their displays of feeling. In fact, the only two emotions that a psychopath really feels are they feel okay or they feel pissed off. Psychopaths really don't feel a whole lot else. You know, disgust, they're not disgusted, they're pissed off because you gave them something that was not okay. They're not anxious, they're pissed off. because that damn snake happened to be in their way. These are individuals who really have very little emotional display. Now, that doesn't mean that all individuals with little emotional display or shallow affect are psychopaths. Remember, having one or two of these does not make you a psychopath. What makes you a psychopath is having a lot of these, having multiple of these clustered together. That's what makes one a psychopath. That's what makes an individual psychopathic. Okay? Lack of callous, lack of empathy. They don't care about other people. Somebody dies, they laugh. Oh, stupid person, ha ha ha, look at that. Okay? Most of us would be, my goodness, the person died. My wife and I see an accident when we're traveling out. If we see an accident, our first reaction is, "Oh my goodness, I hope nobody was seriously hurt." A psychopath's reaction is, "Ooh, let me see if somebody was really hurt." Okay, the psychopath really doesn't care about other people. Doesn't care about other people except as objects. You're not a person to them. You are something they can manipulate. I remember working with a severe psychopath in the prison system. This individual absolutely was totally convinced that women were not human. Women were not human, and therefore women should. You could treat women any way you wanted. You can treat them like you treat your cat or your dog. It doesn't matter because they're not really people. Who cares? Who cares? It's the woman. Um, that lack of empathy, that lack of not lack of that callousness, that disregard for the well-being of others. No concern for whether other people are irritated or annoyed at what they're doing. The psychopath is the bully on the school ground who says, "Just kidding, man. Can't you take a joke?" Well, you're not just kidding. You're hurting other people. You're hurting other people. Parasitic lifestyle. This happens to be one of my favorite ones on the psychopathy checklist. The parasitic lifestyle refers to the fact that a psychopath never really has a job that um, they never really have a job. They never really support themselves. They get other people to take care of them. They get other people to support them. They're leeches. They don't do anything for anyone else. I still remember, and I share this story, and I'll share it probably with you multiple times because really very typical of a psychopath. But when I was working for the Department of Corrections, this one probation officer was talking about John, not his real name, but about John. And he said, "Oh, John came in again to report a new address." I said, "Well, John's always moving. What's wrong with that guy?" Probation officer says, "Yeah, he's got 5 girlfriends. He's with girlfriend 1 until she runs out of money, and then he moves in with girlfriend 2. And when girlfriend 2 runs out of money, he moves in with girlfriend 3. When girlfriend 3 no longer has any money and can't buy him any beer, he moves in with girlfriend 4. Girlfriend 4 runs out of money, he's with girlfriend 5. Girlfriend 5 runs out of money, he's back with girlfriend 1. Each of these ladies takes him back. Now, we can talk about, if you wish, later on, we start talking about domestic violence, what sorts of individuals. It's not just women, because there are female psychopaths too, and there are men who will take the woman back over and over and over again, even though they know that she is just leeching off of him. But we're talking here, because it's what happens mostly with men and women, we'll talk in this regard right now. But you have these men who rely on other people, other women, not other women, but on women to take care of them. They don't work. What they do is they drink beer all day. They hang out with their buddies all day. Um, another example is a woman I'm doing an evaluation on for DSS, had her kids taken from her. Why'd she have her kids taken from her? Because she had this boyfriend who she had expected him to watch their 2 kids while their 2 kids, keep in mind, while she worked. He didn't work. He never worked. He's never had a job, but she was working a full-time job to support him and the kids. And they had two kids that were like, one was an infant under 1 year of age, and the other one was 2 or 3 years of age. Well, the boyfriend's watching these kids one day. That his buddies come over and say, hey, you want to go to the bar and go drink? And he says, sure. Leaves the two kids by themselves in the house while he goes drinking with his buddies. And he gets pissed off because DSS comes in, takes the kids, and charges him with child neglect. What do you mean child neglect? They were okay. They were okay when I left them. I mean, it is that callous lack of empathy and that parasitic lifestyle. The fact that he can't even reciprocate being taken care of by his girlfriend by watching the kids. Can't do anything, and they don't do anything in exchange, and expect it all to be given to them. All of it to be given to them. Okay, so that's the parasitic lifestyle. Poor behavioral controls. They don't have a super ego, okay, to put it in psychoanalytic terms. They've not internalized rules of behavior. They've not internalized the norms of society. And so they have poor controls over their behavior. They basically do what they want, when they want, how they want, with whom they want, so on, which leads also to sexual promiscuity. Sexual promiscuity. Now, I understand that in today's society, with polyamory and people being more free and sexuality outside long-term relationships is becoming more and more the norm. Even so, psychopaths take this to an extreme. Worked with a gentleman in the Department of Corrections. He was a sex offender, was doing a sexual history with him, and I asked him, how many sex partners have you had? And his response was, man, I've had too many, I can't remember. He said, or another example is I was doing an evaluation here just a couple of months ago with an individual who was lamenting to me, a psychopath, will add, who was lamenting to me that before COVID-19, he was to have sex whenever he wanted it. And now with COVID-19, it's hard connecting with women. I said, well, you have sex whenever you wanted it. How often would you have sex? He said, almost every day. I said, how many women did you have sex with twice? He said, none. He said, why would I want to have sex with a woman a second time? Exact comment. Okay? I don't get it. I mean, but then I'm of a different generation and I'm not a psychopath. Early behavior problems. Psychopaths start having problems early in childhood. We're talking problems in elementary school. You're reading about some of them in Samanow's book right now, or at least you should be. Reading about some of them in Samanow's book right now about the early school behavior problems that psychopaths have very, very young. In the first, second, third grade, you can start seeing these problems starting to emerge, and sometimes even earlier than that. Next one is lack of realistic long-term goals. They don't know what they want to do. They say, a probationer just gets out of prison, comes to see me as part of his probation. He has to come and see the shrink to have an evaluation. I asked him, I said, okay, now that you're out of prison, what do you want to do? He says, I want to get a job. I said, well, what kind of job do you want? He said, I want to get a good job. I want to get a good job making a lot of money. Okay, what kind of job do you want? I don't care what kind of job it is. I just want to make a lot of money. Well, if you don't have an idea of what kind of job it is, how do you know you're going to get? Well, I'll get a job. I'll get a job. I'll get a job making money. Well, have you ever had a job making a lot of money before? No, but I will. I'll get one. See, that lack of any sort of goal for their life. Now, I don't expect, teenagers, 13, 14, 15-year-olds to have a definite plan of action, but certainly when somebody is in their 20s or even into their early 30s, they should have some idea of what it is they want to do and some idea of where their life is going. This next one, The impulsivity is kind of like that poor behavioral controls, but it's different in the sense that the poor behavioral controls refers to internal rules, and this refers to spur of the moment decisions. So the impulsivity refers to spur of the moment decisions. I feel like doing it, I'm going to do it. Get the impulse to do it, and you can't resist the impulse. The poor behavior controls is just don't follow the rules. You don't have any rules inside your head. You don't have any directions inside your head. Which then goes along somewhat with the irresponsibility, but the irresponsibility again is this one here, the poor behavioral controls, is following rules. Impulsivity refers to decision making. Do they do things on spur of the moment? Irresponsibility refers to follow through on their obligations. If I, your professor, tell you that I will have your homework corrected by Friday, I'm going to generally have your homework corrected by Friday. Notice how, I've been correcting your weekly quizzes pretty quickly. You turn them in within a day. I'm correcting them. I'm trying to be very responsible and get things done in a timely manner. As opposed to the criminal who, doesn't meet their obligations, doesn't keep their word, doesn't fulfill their responsibilities. With a psychopath, you don't loan a psychopath money. Rule number one: never loan a psychopath money. You either give them the money or don't give them the money. But if you expect it to come back to you, don't, because they are irresponsible and you'll never see it again. I have a cousin who everybody knows with my cousin that you don't loan him money. You either give it to him or you don't. And what I started doing, he's in California. When I was living in California, he had a couple of young children, and he'd come to me and he said, Gordon, I don't have any money to buy food for my kids. Can I borrow 20 off you? I'd say, no, Henry, you can't borrow 20 off me. Let me take you to the grocery store. I'll buy some food for your kids and we'll take it home to them. Because I'm not going to see young kids starve simply because their father's a jerk. Okay. And he would say, no, 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 that's okay. That's okay. I don't need to do that. And I knew damn well he didn't need the $20 to buy food or maybe he did need to buy food for the kids, but he wasn't going to use the $20 to buy food for the kids. That is very much a characteristic of a psychopath. And many of you probably know individuals like that, very irresponsible. Second one is failure to accept responsibility. That is, they don't acknowledge that they're responsible. This is keeping their word, fulfilling their obligation. This is accepting, acknowledging their responsibility. Taking care of their children, for example, taking care of their obligations. Many short-term relationships. A psychopath doesn't have long-term relationships. Now, the definition of what is a long-term relationship, this is a very good question. I've known some teenagers, and my daughter is 16, my son is 17. If they're boyfriend and girlfriend for 3 months, boy, are they in a long-term relationship. So you need to keep in mind that long-term relationships is a matter of developmental. As teenagers, 3 or 4 months is a long-term relationship. As an adult, as a 20-something or a 30-something, if your relationships have only been 2 and 3 month relationships, you're not able to maintain a long-term relationship. Not able to do it. Also, look at their friendships. Look at how long they have been able to maintain friendships. Ask them who their oldest friend is or the longest term friend they've had. Most people have some friends that go back to high school or college. You get to be my age, high school friends are no longer around, but you got college friends. You've got friends who you used to work with 20 years ago that you kind of still communicate with and have a relationship with. Individuals who are psychopathic, because they don't care about other people. They genuinely don't care about other people. Have no many don't have good long-term relationships at all. Juvenile delinquency, this is very similar to the early behavior problems. The difference between these two is these are not necessarily legal difficulties. These are legal difficulties. And so the number 12, the early behavior problems are disruptive behavior in school, petty theft from mom and dad, breaking things of their brothers and sisters, that type of thing. Whereas the juvenile delinquency is now they've been arrested and they've been charged with with criminal activities. And so that's the difference between those two criteria. Um, Revocation of probation or parole, that is, they've been granted probation or parole, but they didn't follow it, and so it was revoked. That is another indication of psychopathy because part of it is, as I mentioned, they just cannot follow the rules. They cannot follow the rules. And then another one of my favorite is criminal versatility. Psychopaths are jack of all trades when it comes to criminal activity. They do all kinds of different criminal acts, not just one or two criminal acts. They do all kinds of criminal acts. Uh, they're stealing, they're selling drugs, they're prostituting, they're engaged in physical violence. They're doing, you name it. If it's illegal, they're doing it. Um, they're very, very versatile in terms of their criminal acts. They're not the cat burglar or the professional burglar who breaks into people's houses and steals things, and that's all they do. Although that's bad enough, that's all they do. These are the individuals who are breaking into your house. They're breaking into your car. They're pickpocketing you. They're uh, um, shoplifting, they're assaulting people, they're, you name it, they're doing it. If it is illegal, they're figuring out a way to do it without getting caught. Now, this is the psychopathy checklist. Not that you have to do the entire psychopathy checklist or go over it item by item by item with Kevin Mitnick, but in answering the question, is he a psychopath? This is an incredibly good place to start. Now let's take a look, and I want to talk a little bit about narcissism. Narcissism and psychopathy are different, and I've got about 7 minutes left, and I'm going to take those 7 minutes and use them. So I'm going to go back to my whiteboard here because narcissism becomes a very important characteristic of criminal behavior as well. Narcissism refers to self-love, but there is a lot of misconceptions about narcissism. Narcissism actually exists along a continuum. We are all a little bit narcissistic. We are all a little bit invested in ourselves, all a little bit self-centered, a little bit self-focused. The difference between a normal person with a healthy level of narcissism and a narcissistic personality is our ability to connect with, care for, and have compassion and empathy for others. The narcissist doesn't have it. In fact, narcissism is one of the key characteristics of psychopathy. If you look at psychopathy, there are three primary characteristics of psychopathy. One is narcissism. The second is antisocial behavior. And the third is exploitation of others. So all of the psychopathy checklists can be boiled down into these three primary characteristics here. The antisocial behavior goes without saying. This is behavior. This is behavior, things they are doing. The lying, the criminal versatility, the sexual promiscuity, the so on. The exploitation is the taking advantage of other people. The conning, the manipulative, uh, you know, getting things over on others. And the narcissism is the self-focus, the intense lack of empathy, the lack of care or concerning for other people, the grandiose sense of self-esteem, and so on. So talking about narcissism, I'm gonna talk about this briefly, and then I see I have one viewer on my here today, and I will stop and see if there's any questions. But the one thing I'm going to share about narcissism is the two basic types of. There are actually eight types of narcissists, but I'm going to talk mainly about two broad categories of narcissism. I want to talk about the benign and the malignant. The benign and the malignant narcissist. What is the difference? The benign narcissist is willing to allow you to bask in the glow of their wonderfulness. And if you don't want to recognize how wonderful they are and you don't want to bask in the wonderfulness that they have, well, you can move aside and let somebody else bask in their glow. They're not robbing you, they're not thugging, they're not manipulating you. They don't have to, because they know how wonderful they are, and they don't need to mess with anybody who can't recognize their wonderfulness. The malignant narcissist, on the other, the way the malignant narcissist is able to keep their narcissism tank full is by robbing you of your narcissism. They push you down to make themselves feel up. They push you, they make you feel worthless to make themselves feel worthwhile. The malignant narcissist is the one who is going out and harming other people. They're the ones who really intentionally um, uh, attack and um, are exploitive, they're manipulative. There's even with the malignant narcissist, there is a very strong sadistic streak in them that they really feel better. They feel much better about themselves when they see you suffering, whether it's you suffering physically or you suffering psychologically or you suffering financially. The fact that you're suffering makes them feel good because, my goodness, they're so much better than that. Which is and than you. So I'm going to stop here. I've got two or 3 minutes here. Um, are there any questions about this so far? Any questions about psychopathy, narcissism? Again, this is for those of you who are evaluating the presentations. Keep in mind that you need to just pick out two of the issues in psychopathy and evaluate how well the individual addresses those two issues. Your grade will depend upon how well you are, because how well you evaluate the person shows me how much you understand the concept of psychopathy in this particular case. All right, questions, comments? Okay. Well, then I will stop here. It is now 3 o'clock. I'm not going to make this go any longer than 1 hour. I appreciate your attention. Those of you who are watching this later can certainly glean the information you need from it. And I will see you in class either on Monday and Friday next week to go more in detail on psychopathy. Have a great weekend or a great rest of your week, and I will see you later.